What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 65, and I'm the co-host Kyle Anslone, joined by the other co-host Will Porter. Will, welcome back to the show. How you doing, buddy?
Good, Kyle. I had to take a little hiatus. Life got a little hectic for a minute there, but I'm back to co-host the show with you now. How you doing, man?
I'm great, and so excited to have you on today. I've been holding down the fort without you, but
Yes, you have.
we've been just still doing the 3 shows a week, and everything's been going well. Had a lot of interviews, but always excited to have you back on, especially because of the topics we have today: New Start, RussiaGate, all the great stuff that we always talk about. So, Will, let's see. Tell people to support the show. Share from YouTube, Conflicts of Interest. The subscribe star account is getting verified, so check that out in the next week or so and should be able to donate to the show there. I've started up a Discord channel, so anybody's donating to the show, I'll hang out there during the day. You could, come in, suggest topics for the show or something like that. And the last thing you could do to support the show is support the sponsor and help yourself out. Get yourself some great CBD products at Paloma Verde. The website is palomaverdestore.com. They had great lab tested CBD products. You know you're getting quality stuff. No more head shop gummies and stuff like that, but actual soft gels or extracts, even stuff for your pets. Great stuff. They sometimes have sales over there, and you get yourself a discount when you let them know you came from the show using the promo code PEACE, PEACE at checkout. And again, go to palomaverdestore.com. All right, well, let's get into this. The first thing we have is a short video clip of Biden's press secretary just giving a brief rundown of what Biden's going to talk about with Vladimir Putin. So I'll play that, and then me and Will will kind of get into how U.S. and Russian relations are going in the first couple of weeks of the Biden presidency.
Okay.
A measure for testing for all passengers on U.S. domestic.
He called President Putin this afternoon with the intention of discussing our willingness to extend New START for 5 years, and also to reaffirm our strong support for Ukraine's sovereignty in the face of Russia's ongoing aggression, and also to raise matters of concern, including the SolarWinds hack, reports of Russia placing bounties on United States soldiers in Afghanistan, interference in the 2020 election, the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, and treatment of peaceful protesters by Russian security forces.
But can you talk a little bit about how you're going to measure success and what the...
His intention was also to make clear that the United States will act firmly in defense of our national interests in response to malign actions by Russia.
Nord Stream 2, the pipeline from Russia to Germany.
The president continues to believe that Nord Stream 2 is a bad deal for Europe. We're aware that the previous administration imposed new restrictions on activities related to the pipeline under the National Defense Authorization Act, and we will be reviewing those measures. And so he looks forward to continuing to consult with our European partners on this issue, and if there's more to share on his conversation with Chancellor Merkel on it, we will certainly circle back with you more directly.
Fauci on Fox today went back to quoting that 100 million doses in 100.
All right. Well, so that was the brief, I guess, kind of statement early on from the Biden administration. I heard today that we're supposed to actually get a speech from Biden, I guess, this week on his foreign policy. But for right now, she kind of sums it up as we got a new start going on, and then a whole bunch of bad things. But let's focus on the good news here first. And we actually had an extension of the New START treaty. Well, so do we have like details? Has anything changed, or did they just do the straight up 5-year extension?
I believe, based on what I've read, that there weren't any major modifications to the deal. I think that was actually part of the problem. Like when Trump was trying to renegotiate it at the end of his term, was the U.S. side trying to cram in all these new conditions and new changes to the deal. And I believe, yeah, they've agreed just to the basic 5-year extension that is built right into the treaty. But yeah, as you said, and as people heard in that from Jen Psaki, there is some mixed news here. But to start with the better part, I think, is the extension of New START. We should remind people it is one of the last major surviving arms control agreements with Russia, constraining the U.S. and Russian nuclear arsenals, the world's two largest. So that's it's obviously a big deal when we're talking about this treaty expiring, which it does in like 5 days here. I think it's February 5th that this thing's supposed to die. And it looked like, the Trump administration, I think, very foolishly and dangerously played politics with this treaty. Like I was saying, they were adding all these new preconditions into it and stuff. He was trying to spin it into his reelection campaign and sell the extension of the agreement as sort of his personal success. But that they didn't do that. The U.S. officials kept adding all these new things to it, and the Russians refused, and the talks basically died. And so with Biden coming in, it did look like he was going to do something on this front to not let this deal expire. I mean, his former boss, Barack Obama, is originally the one who negotiated this deal after all. So I think Biden would consider that part of his own legacy. He was vice president when it was initially negotiated. But yeah, now this week, it does look like they finally reached this deal to extend it for 5 years. On Tuesday, Vladimir Putin had a call with Biden, a phone call, and later that day, I think he sent a draft deal to the Russian parliament, which they approved unanimously. Unlike U.S. law, I think under the Russian law, their parliament has to ratify even agreements to extend existing treaties, which, again, I don't think they have to do that here in the U.S. I think they just have to ratify like the original deal itself. But now with New START, I think there's just some procedural stuff to do to exchange diplomatic notes or whatever, and I think it is a done deal. So again, all great news. The treaty should not be allowed to die, especially after, previous U.S. administrations have killed some of the other major arms control deals signed after the Cold War. I mean, you had the anti-ballistic missile treaty killed by George Bush in 2002 with encouragement from, the infinitely depraved and evil John Bolton. And then you had Trump killing the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, the INF. And I think also with help from Bolton. I forget if he was in
right.
office.
And then the Open Skies treaty, which helped to do arms monitoring and stuff like that. Well, I mean, I should jump in here and mention that I have been pretty skeptical and pretty open on the show about my skepticism that Joe Biden would be able to get this done, just because every statement from Biden on Russia was, I want to extend New START, but, and then all these other issues. And I thought all those other issues were going to amount to, too much maybe to overcome. And so while, in the U.S., I guess this is, to the extent that it's being covered at all, it's just being like, oh, good job, Biden, for getting this done. But give some credit to Putin here, who was apparently willing to work with any U.S. administration. And I mean, within days of the Biden administration coming in, even though there's been some hostile rhetoric from the Biden administration towards Russia, they were able to set that aside and go ahead and approve and get this thing done. That is really important. The great thing that I noticed there was that the new deal will expire in 2026. And so not just a month after or a couple months after a presidential election, in the U.S. at least. Maybe that's like the day after a Russian presidential election or something. But the timing of that looks a little bit better. So I just wanted to mention that, I had been very skeptical on this on the show and talked about it a lot, but good on Biden and very good on Putin for being able to get this thing done so fast. And even though there's a whole bunch of other issues still with the U.S.-Russia relationship that, we're definitely going to talk about, Will, this is at least not a step in the wrong direction. And it could have been a very big and dangerous one.
Yeah, absolutely. They had a chance to really screw this up with this deal. Like, the first week of the administration, they could have, or, the first month, let's say, they could have really dropped the ball with that. Glad they didn't. But, I think we should, not be too optimistic. We shouldn't see this as like, oh, it's a new dawn on, U.S.-Russia relations. It's going to, only improve from here on out. Because like we were talking about with Jen Psaki, that clip we just played, she has a real list of other things that they're going to make priorities throughout Biden's administration, it sounds like.
Right.
She said they're ordering this intel assessment, I think, on like this list of hostile stuff, a lot of which, we've discussed in the show, a lot of which doesn't seem to hold much water. I mean, the stuff about the Taliban paying bounties the Russians paying bounties to Taliban troops, that stuff's been repeatedly debunked, I think repeatedly even denied by the Pentagon itself, that like they've seen no evidence of this. And I would think these Pentagon officials would have an incentive to want to spin that and to play that up. But they've said they've seen no good proof of that. I think she mentioned the solar winds hack, which I've personally not seen any good indication that Russia's involved. I think even FireEye, that cybersecurity firm who often does point fingers at state actors and blames Russia for stuff, they weren't willing to even put Russia's name on that solar winds thing. So there's various things that they're going to try to look into. Meddling in the 2020 election. Again, just we've been hearing these claims without evidence for years and years now. I've seen almost no evidence to suggest it did anything in the 2020 race. But that stuff they're all going to make priorities, as well as the purported poisoning of Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition figure. Which out of all these, that's one that I have not really reached firm conclusions on. Like it does seem with that story they jumped to this whole chemical weapons Novichok story a little quick. But then again, there are doctors in Berlin who say they treated Navalny and did blood tests or whatever. They say they found nerve agent in his blood. And so I don't know how I can't refute that or say they're wrong. And so that's one where I would like to know more. However, what I can say is whatever the U.S. intelligence community comes up with is going to be the maximum hostility thing. I don't think we can really take their word or trust them at all. They're not credible. I don't trust them to look into this and come back to us with what really happened. So regardless, I think all these things will be spun into further hostility with Moscow, unfortunately.
Right. I guess the one positive thing, Will, I'm seeing here is that the political pressure seems very different under Biden than under Trump, where
Yes.
had Trump made this deal with Putin to just extend New START for 5 years, I'm pretty sure it would have been portrayed as a giveaway and Trump doing Putin's work. I mean, we still have people. I'm not talking about like your random Facebook boomer friend who's sharing a meme from Occupy Democrats saying that Donald Trump owes Vladimir Putin $40 million and needs to pay him off or whatever the hell. But you have Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi saying that we need like a commission to look into the relationship between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, and wondering if Vladimir Putin was on the phone with Donald Trump during the Capitol riot. Like just the like most far-flung crazy thing. Like even if Donald Trump was Vladimir Putin's puppet, you really think that he needed to call the boss on January 6th to receive orders? I mean, it's just so silly and stupid, right? Or that they would like be talking on like the White House, like that's the way it would work. I mean, come on, like these ladies like haven't even like read a Tom Clancy novel or something, and like could think a couple like steps down the road of how this espionage would really work if it was true, which is
Putin had to use
absolutely
a secret code and activate his sleeper agent in the White House. He had to call him the day of.
right. You would think at least they would claim like Steve Miller was passing notes between the two the whole like made something up that's possible. Right,
We can make it sound way more plausible than they can.
Right, I could
We're
spin
making
a better story than that. So with all that, I guess less of a concern now that Biden's president for the mainstream media and the establishment in general. It's good that they're able to get this done, I guess, without having to ramp up tensions. But I mean, it looks to me like the Biden administration is doing it anyways. I have this article here from Dave DeCamp. He is news.antiwar.com. This one titled U.S. Navy sends 3 warships into the Black Sea. Russia deploys missile system. So in one sense, you have, Biden signing an arms control extension with Putin. And at the same time, he's sending warships into the Black Sea, which, I mean, is kind of a Russian lake. So, Will, let's talk a little bit about this and how even though they're trying in one sense to bridge ties, they have to be hostile in another.
Yeah, I mean, who does this remind you of? This policy? I think back last November we actually talked about under Trump when they sent these were not warships but warplanes. They sent these bombers over the Black Sea to test Russia's defenses in Crimea. And it seems like that's exactly what they're doing with this here. Like they triggered a Russian response. I think the Russians deployed a mobile anti-ship missile system. And so we do these things. It seems we do this stuff over the Black Sea and near Crimea as like an intelligence trap to try to get to force the Russians to respond so we can analyze their response. And we've done that stuff before, but when the last time we talked about it, it was under Trump. And now just here in like Biden's first week or couple weeks in office, he's continuing these very same, very provocative policies. These, as we've talked about over and over again on the show, just how these sort of surveillance and show of force missions can be trouble. They can lead to accidents. They can lead to all kinds of stuff that you can end up with a accidental escalation into conflict rather than a deliberate one, which would just be a damn shame.
Right. And this is just at the beginning of the Biden administration. You would think that he would try to get things off to the right foot and not carry out these kind of escalatory, tension-raising measures right away, especially when he's just, now signing the New START treaty and getting that thing done and pushed through. It's just the craziest thing where, like during the Obama administration, in one sense, he's signing the JCPOA to take war with Iran off the table, and then he has to go and fight a war in Syria to take Iran down a peg, and fight a war in Yemen to make the Saudis feel better about him signing the nuclear deal, where the U.S. foreign policy is just all over the place all the time, and it ends up being so crazy and really so destructive, Will. Part of the reason the U.S. and Russian relationship is so bad is because of the fake Russiagate narrative. And one of the key people behind the fake Russiagate narrative is FBI lawyer Kevin Clinesmith. And so do you want to remind us who this guy is real quick, Will? And why his probation is really a real slap in the face to what Russiagate did to the American population?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, people might recall, Kevin Clinesmith was this FBI attorney who was working on the Trump-Russia collusion, alleged collusion case back, I think, in 2016. And during the FISA application process, when the FBI was trying to get warrants to spy on members of the Trump team, this guy Clinesmith doctored an email to make it appear that this Trump advisor, Carter Page, was not a source for any government agency, any U.S. government agency, when in reality Page had been a CIA source or some kind of an asset, or on some level he had been some kind of CIA source. And at the time, the FBI was trying to portray Page as some kind of shadowy Russian agent or asset or something, which certainly doesn't really track with him being a CIA informant, like a reliable person who I think gave them information on the Russians. So they just doctored the evidence to omit that fact that he had worked with the CIA. And so Clinesmith, I think, pleaded guilty in August to making a false statement to judicial officials. And then just this last week, he was finally sentenced. But like you said, it was basically a slap in the face. It was a slap in the wrist for him, but it was a slap in the face for us, because he was only given a year of probation and like 400 hours of community service, which, there are ways for that to be reduced and for him to not really have to do much for him to, serve that. And the crime that he was charged with carries, I think, a max penalty of like 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. And so in comparison to that, this is certainly a slap on the wrist, just a year of probation and no fine at all. And I believe he's so far the only person to be charged and for anything in relation to the FBI's FISA applications, which were completely riddled with lies and errors and omissions and inaccuracies, deliberately to pull the wool over the eyes of the FISA courts. And the FISA courts, they're just a rubber stamp. They approve everything. I think people have done studies on this, like what percentage of warrant requests do they reject, and it's like 0.01% or something. So these guys just rubber stamp it no matter what. But the FBI was very clearly like trying to game this whole process. And another interesting thing about this Clinesmith guy too, you might have a bit more on this, but more recent court documents, there have been some more recent reporting showing that Clinesmith and his superiors, people like Peter Strzok and Andrew McCabe, were well aware of Carter Page's connection to the CIA, like way earlier than we previously thought, and well before they had ever tried to spy on him. And so they still didn't share all this information with the FISA court. They fully knew it, and they just straight up lied to get that warrant, which I think is a pretty major abuse of power, which almost nobody has been held accountable for so far.
Yeah, I mean, well, you just hit on the major highlights of this article from Real Clear Investigations by Paul Sperry from January 25th, titled "New Evidence Implicates FBI Higher-Ups in Dishonesty of Anti-Trump Lawyer," and he's talking about, again, Kevin Clinesmith and how the higher-ups at the FBI, like Peter Strzok and like Andrew McCabe, did know about the lie that he told. On the last show, Will, I had on Mike Meharry to talk about qualified immunity and how important it is to hold cops accountable when they, commit crimes, because, if they're not held accountable for their abuses of power, they're just going to go crazy abusing power. Giving this guy, just a little slap on the wrist like this, to me, says to the FBI, well, hell, just go ahead and lie on all these FISA applications, because it's probably going to be pretty damn unlikely that anybody actually figures it out unless you're the president of the United States. who has the ability to actually declassify and, push through investigations to get this exposed. But even if it does get exposed, they don't get in trouble for it anyway. So what's, I guess this guy's name has been dragged through the mud a little bit. And, like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, they've been embarrassed some, but avoiding jail time is pretty huge. And, I'm sure that if, me or you did anything near like this, like lying to the FBI or lying to the FISA court, well, I think we'd be doing a little bit more than 12 months probation. But that is what Paul Sperry's article here is that the higher ups knew about this as well. And so that should mean that not only is Clinesmith in jail, but that, he's sharing a cell with Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok. But, they're not going to happen because they're protected men. Not unlike Obama's former CIA director, who Leon Panetta, who gave classified information. Oh, no, David Petraeus, sorry. Who gave classified information to his mistress, including the president's schedule, by the way. That was part of the classified information he gave over, but he doesn't have to go to jail for that.
He's fine. He didn't mean it.
Anything else on the Clinesmith thing? I mean, again, for people who it has to be, especially for Carter Page, who like received real ass death threats and whose name was dragged through the mud. He probably should be owed apologies by people like, Chris Hayes and Rachel Maddow, who made such a big deal out of his indictment and everything, when in reality, he should have never been investigated in the first place. And if anything, according to the standards that they said, he was doing a service to his country by informing on Russia, and they drug his name through the mud and everything. And it has, and onto like even I think George Papadopoulos and others too, who have been victims of this whole thing, to see one of the perpetrators at the FBI actually go to court and get zero justice handed out was quite amazing.
Yeah, I think you make a good point too, that like the message just sends to other FBI agents, just like go ahead and lie your ass off on these FISA warrants. Like, I mean, when they're entrapping some Muslim or whatever, when it's a lower level case, like certainly that person's gonna have no ability to get any kind of probe, the way that Trump was able to get a probe into the whole Russiagate thing. And so, yeah, people are absolutely powerless to do anything about this. And even when the courts find out, they don't care. They just give you a little probation. You're fine. So,
the last thing I want to mention is that, well, I don't think this is ever going to end. This article I have here, this is a new piece from The Guardian, right? The perfect target. Russia cultivated Trump as an asset for 40 years, according to ex-KGB spy. I swear, they just take the word of this former KGB spy and reprint it through this whole story, saying, yeah, it would have been really nice for Russia. It would have made sense for them to target Trump for the past 40 years. Never mind that, 40 years ago it was the USSR and the changes of power, and why the hell would Vladimir Putin have been involved in this the whole time? But I mean, the story is absolutely absurd, and they're just going to keep spitting stuff out like this. And so it's very important that we really attack the foundation of this whole Russiagate narrative and make sure everybody knows is a fake bit of, just lies used to warmonger. I guess let's move on to this domestic terrorism stuff, Will, which,
Sure.
We are particularly interested in as libertarians, as the former CIA director, John Brennan, Obama's ogre, recently said that even libertarians are being targeted with laser-like focus by the, intelligence agencies and the FBI, as they investigate, thought crimes and stuff like that. So it looks like the Biden administration has put out a terror alert. And I guess this is 2006 and I'm back in high school, and, today's an orange day, huh, Will, or what's going on with this?
Yeah, man, that does seem like kind of what we're getting back to here. We're seeing a lot of like parallels, I think, with like the post 9/11 period. We're seeing a lot of very alarming trends where, specifically related to the whole Capitol riot situation, where there's now all this endless talk. You just keep hearing about domestic terrorism and domestic extremism and demands for the U.S. national security state to crush it. There have been all kinds of calls for that in the media and in politics. In some of my writing at RT, I've rounded up some of those calls in media to, why we must treat this as terrorism. And then even if you just go on Twitter and stuff, random rank and file people are, are spouting this stuff, talking about domestic terrorism and extremism. And now I don't want to give the impression this is all brand new, because like certainly the DHS and the FBI have been talking about this stuff for years, like homegrown extremism. And even during Trump's last year in office, we did hear some of this. Like, his DOJ was labeling Antifa and other, these left-wing militants as terrorists and stuff like that during all the George Floyd protests and riots, which we covered. However, over the
And
last
we
few
could
weeks, it's
also highlight
Go
something
ahead.
we had talked about on the show, which was, they called the alleged kidnap plot against your governor there, Will, as an example of domestic terrorism and stuff like that, even though it's come out that two, maybe three of the six people they claim were actually involved in the kidnapping plot were either FBI agents or informants. And so that's quite wild. You had to imagine that the social dynamics change when three of the people are interested in making an event happen. Imagine if those three people like were not interested in, getting an arrest and drumming up the attack. That was just crazy, and we had called that right away that there was going to be FBI informants in that, but half of them, anyways, yeah, they drum up terror threats.
Yeah, yeah. And also, let's not forget. I think we mentioned this in the show. Remember the Mujahideen, those Boogaloo guys who apparently had like contacted Hamas or something. That case also was heavily infested with informants. Pretty much every time you see a case like that where it becomes this big high-profile terrorism story, there are FBI agents swarming and confidential informants all over that story, like driving that plot, making it happen. But nonetheless, over the last week or so, since the January 6th incident in the Capitol, things I think have gotten dramatically worse in terms of just like the amount of demands and the people who are, you basically have half the country now believing that the other half are traitors and terrorists and coup plotters and insurrectionists. And I think we're really seeing like an escalation of that rhetoric. And we're also already seeing a huge militarization of Washington, D.C., where we all saw the inauguration was heavily militarized, but they're supposed to have troops now in the streets into April, I think. So we're seeing some major security theater. And I will say, too, just as a caveat, I personally don't think what happened in Washington, D.C. on January 6th was anything like a coup attempt or a real insurrection. Like, I think it's fair to call it a riot or a violent disturbance or something. People did die there, although, a lot of them were protesters, one of whom was shot by the police. So, but nonetheless, the corporate media and a large part of the political establishment are running with this as if this was Pearl Harbor, or as Glenn Greenwald said, the neoliberal 9/11. That does seem pretty apt, like the response we're getting here. Maybe it won't be quite as blatant as aggressive, or at least it hasn't been yet, as like what we saw after the 9/11 attacks. But this has absolutely become this like defining event for a lot of people they're convinced that America just came inches from falling to a fascist dictatorship. And I think this all becomes very dangerous. You're throwing these terms around. You're applying the terrorism label to millions and millions of people. You're suggesting they're all part of Trump's like brown shirt army or something. And you're also weaponizing all this exaggerated rhetoric we've been hearing for years about Nazis and white supremacists. And this is all just kind of coming together and culminating. And like you're saying, like it just seems like if you're even right of center at all anymore, you can be labeled a neo-Nazi terrorist. Like, John Brennan, like you mentioned, going on TV the other day saying he had this big list of his enemies of democracy. And somehow libertarians made it on that list, along with like religious fanatics and like wife beaters or some, all the worst people in the world. But that's who they're going to crack down on. And now, like, you started this segment with Joe Biden has ordered a threat assessment from his director of national intelligence. She's supposed to look into this issue. She's not confirmed yet, Avril Haines. She was like a deputy CIA director under Obama, I think. But nonetheless, she's supposed to be looking into the domestic extremism as well as the role of social media in radicalizing people, which I found that pretty disconcerting. And I like this. The social media aspect, I think, too, also ties into all this, like the recent ban campaigns. Like, getting kicked off Facebook is not the worst thing that can ever happen to you, but it is just another way of broadening, like, who is beyond the pale, who's an extremist, who must be ejected from polite society. And I think that is sort of just fueling all these trends we're talking about here, about this push against domestic extremism. And I mean, Biden's DHS nominee, I forget the guy's name, Alejandro something, M. He before he was even before Biden even took office, I should say, his DHS nominee was already talking about going after domestic extremism. And now they've put out this terrorism alert, and they're specifically citing people with anti-government views, as well as anybody who like protested Biden's election win or bought into that story. And they're saying they're motivated by false narratives. And there's just a lot of alarming trends going on right now. Like we haven't seen anything super draconian yet, beyond like the stationing of troops in the Capitol, but like nothing on the level of the Patriot Act yet. But I really think people should keep their eyes on this. Like all this talk of domestic terrorism and stuff, I think really could spiral into something very Orwellian. We saw some parallels after 9/11 to this, with the anti-terrorism drive and looking to label certain groups of people as terrorists. But I think this has the potential to be much more broad and like sweeping, directed directly at at half of the American population.
Right. Well, an interesting thing that you already have in the U.S. as to compare to like what we had on 9/11 is we already have, essentially an armed, little militia, a police force in every town with fairly sophisticated military equipments in the U.S. And then, of course, all these armed federal agencies, they're already deployed here, Will. So, that's part of what's going on. Also, how generally they label things now as like anti-government. So if you're, anti the over-militarized police forces, they're gonna come kick your door down. It's absolutely crazy what they're talking about and how they're really trying to, I think, eliminate thoughts outside of the establishment and trying to really narrow up what Americans are allowed to think and do. And I'm sure a part of that reason is kind of like what we've seen in the past week or so with the whole GameStop thing is, they're saying that this is part of the Trump movement in a way. That's kind of the silly Trumpism stuff, but in another, I'm sure it is like a lot of the same people that are still pissed off from the 2008 financial crisis, and hell, a lot of people that I've seen on Facebook and Twitter who are like posting about holding on to their GameStop stocks and stuff like that. They know they could cash out now and get more money, but it's about like vengeance and vendetta. And I feel like there is like kind of that same vibe from the Trump movement, but that also comes from the Bernie guys. There's a lot of people on the left that are very excited about this kind of stuff. And I think we're all going to be lumped into the anti-government camp pretty quickly here. And those kinds of thoughts and issues won't be allowed. And I think the biggest threat is once we have this domestic terror war going on at home, and then if there's, let's say, a terrorist attack, like some guy from Yemen who's absolutely tired of the genocide going on in his country comes over here and does something absolutely horrendous, then people who are against increasing the war are going to be, fighting on the side of the, external terrorists, and I think be really demonized. And I think we're just going down a really dangerous road with this stuff, Will.
Absolutely. And on the thing of them labeling us all as anti-government extremists, you know what? Let them do that, I think. That's part of the political realignment that I want to see. Those opposed to the blood-soaked U.S. empire and the state versus those, the empire itself. And so the left and right stuff, I don't care to align along that. I think it should be more anti-government people. Let them label us like that.
I guess the last thing I had on the domestic terrorist point, Will, was just how we have to worry about trumped up threats coming in now. So now that the FBI has like a big federal mandate to go after domestic terrorists, they're going to have to turn up some domestic terrorists. Now, there may be like some people on the right who are crazy enough to kill people. That may exist. However, I don't think there's a huge domestic terrorist problem in this country. But I think the FBI could definitely drum some up. There's plenty of people who are on the right, who are poor, who are pissed off, who have bad lives, who don't have friends. All the hard marks needed for the FBI to come in, befriend the person, say, man, doesn't that Joe Biden guy really suck? Doesn't he make your life worse? Don't you just want to get Joe Biden? Joe Biden's terrible. And Kamala Harris, ooh, she's really nasty, isn't she? And like, you know, maybe get him to like make a black joke about that woman or something. And then after that, they'll get him to go somewhere with a gun and arrest him and be like, oh boy, we just stopped a huge shooting. And, you know, we talked about the Michigan story already and how there are so many FBI informants in there. But this was something else. Well, this was one of my favorite headlines that I have read in a while. It's an exclusive from Reuters, and it may not be quite as huge of a story as the headline sounds, but Proud Boys leader was prolific informer for law enforcement. I love that they use the word prolific in there. He wasn't just a regular informer. He was the best, Will.
This dude was productive.
Right. So, what's his name? Enrique Torres, or Torreo. He's the leader of the Proud Boys. People call the Proud Boys an extremist group. I've known a couple of people who at least are Proud Boy adjacent. You know, I've never heard them come off as really as extremist. I mean, maybe people could say that they're sexist. I think that's kind of where their whole movement came from, was far more about like, you know, feeling like the mainstream media was like anti-male more than even like a racial thing. But we now have, you know, them being called an extremist group just offhandedly. But apparently that this guy was a federal informant for quite a few years. Now, I've heard some people saying that, oh no, he wasn't, you know, busting up or, you know, making up like these domestic terror threats, or was actually doing work for human smuggling or something like that. But it's very interesting that he's so prominent and has these deep ties to the FBI. Also, if the Proud Boys really organized this coup, how the hell could the FBI not have gone to their informant and figured out that this was going to happen? You know, that seems just like a huge hole in the whole, you know, coup plot thing. So, I don't know. You got anything else on this, Will? I just wanted to bring it up in the fact that I think this is going to become very common.
Yeah, I just thought I find it very ironic that they are now trying to say that they're trying to say the Proud Boys were somehow involved in the Capitol riot, which I don't really like. There may have been some like individual dudes there who identified that way, but I thought a whole different group had arranged that rally and stuff. Like, I don't think that was, I don't know, a Proud Boys operation. As far as I know, anyway. But this whole thing, like, I just think we've hit on some, common themes throughout this episode. Just the way that, like, the feds, the way they can game this system against whoever they want, even a sitting president of the United States, when it comes to, you know, gaming the FISA warrant system, to drumming up these fake domestic terrorism plots, to, you know, just busting, you know, people for drugs and stuff. There's so much underhanded, dodgy stuff that goes on with these federal agencies. And we, like, just in this one episode, we've hit on like 3 different totally separate aspects of how they screw people. And the Enrique Tarrio thing. Another aspect of that's interesting is, like, what are his ties still to the feds? Is this guy, like, is he on some long con mission where, like, his mission was to infiltrate a right-wing movement or something and stoke domestic extremism? I don't know. Like, but I see stuff like that, but it does make me very suspicious about, like, how much of what you're seeing is being driven by a confidential informant, or, you know, how much of it is organic and genuine.
So the last thing I have for us to talk about here today, Will, is U.S. arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Towards the end of the Trump administration, he was signing a bunch of arms deals, F-35s, drones, bombs to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. I believe you wrote up this one for ROT that I have up here titled U.S. Green Lights, Sale of 3,000 Bombs worth $290 million to Saudi Arabia, and flurry of other Mideast arms sales. So do you want to just do a quick recap of some of the arms sales that came out right at the end of the Trump administration to these countries?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Trump approved a ton of weapons deals before he left office. And I don't even think I can list all of them from memory. But like, even in his lame duck period, after losing the election, he kept pushing these through. Like, as late as December 29th, I think, they approved that a sale of, like you said, $290 million in bombs to the Saudis, $4 billion for a bunch of Apache helicopters to Kuwait. And just before that, they greenlit, I think, $22 billion in missiles to Taiwan, a bunch of missiles and missile defense stuff, and $23 billion to the UAE for the F-35 and a bunch of other weapons. So, yeah, there was a real flurry of these. there's a specific agency, the Defense Export Agency, I think, that you can go and look at all the weapons deals. But yeah, there was a ton in Trump's just in his final months in office there.
Yeah, and I think they took another step forward with the UAE F-35 deal on the 19th, but I think that was already in motion. Now, this was something talked about that maybe Biden could do something different about this, and it's being portrayed that he is, but this is really why I wanted to get into. I have an article here from Kelly Vlahos at Responsible Statecraft, that's the Quincy Institute, titled "Biden Slams the Brakes on UAE Saudi Gravy Train for Now." And the key of that headline is, of course, the "for now." So what Biden decided to do, and this is according to the Wall Street Journal, is that Biden put the freeze on Trump administration arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Not all of them, just certain packages that were coming through at the end. I haven't seen them like stopping it. Like, there's no ships with missiles on them headed to Saudi Arabia right now. They're either turning around or, freezing in the ocean and waiting to deliver the weapons or not. But they are reviewing now these weapon packages, so that's good. You take a look and then don't sell them. However, it could just be a way to buy a little bit of time till this story goes away, and then they'll quietly approve these weapon sales anyways. And so I just want to break this one down a little bit, because some people are really celebrating it, and great that he didn't just say, yeah, we're going ahead with all these weapon sales, but it's far short of a real, I think, freeze in the U.S.-Saudi, U.S.-UAE relationship and how many arms come with that relationship.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think temporarily this is like good to see. Certainly, that's good to not see them just like blast through those arms deals. I think it's like $31 billion in weapons altogether that we're talking about here. And as far as I understood, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought they did actually freeze, like temporarily at least, freeze the deals to Saudi. Whereas I think the UAE stuff is purely just under review. But the UAE deals, though, I think were supposed to take several years before they're even delivered anyway. So, I think that effectively they did temporarily pause those for now. It's not totally certain they're going to cancel the sales, but they're at least apparently considering it. Now, the best thing about this, I think, is that in the statement that I saw, Biden specifically cited, or I don't know, one of his spokespeople, his press secretary, or maybe it was Blinken, but they specifically cited the war in Yemen as a reason for this review, to make sure that the weapons won't be used in war crimes. Now, the U.S. already claimed to do that. They were already supposed to do that anyway. There's supposed to be some kind of due diligence in terms of ensuring the recipients of our weapons don't drop them on little babies or something. So, they were already supposed to do that. I'm not sure if that's going to make a big difference that they're saying it now. We could just end up seeing a delay in some of these sales, but it seems there's a potential for it to happen that they could actually be canceled.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I was more saying I'm not sure if, like, let's say they just delay this or freeze it for a couple of weeks. I don't think that probably affects like the production or the distribution of the weapons. It would have to be, like 6 months down the line, if they still have these frozen, then maybe there are bombs that would have gone to Saudi Arabia that haven't yet. But if it just ends up being a month or so, much like Trump freezing the military aid to Ukraine, the Ukrainians didn't even know it happened because he did it for such a short amount of time. I also think that's part of the problem with, I believe the Biden administration did give waivers for aid groups to continue doing business in Yemen, and I guess them not applying all the sanctions that would come with the Trump administration's designation of the Houthi as a terrorist group. But at the same time, how long it takes to get the aid over there, the fact that a lot of these aid groups already pulled their American workers out of Yemen, they're not going to send them back if they're going to have to leave in another 3 weeks. And so unless the Biden administration actually, extends the length of the waivers to be like 6 months, or just says that we're not going to apply the sanctions, then it's really not the life-saving measure that it comes off as, and it is really just maybe like a minor blip in what is been just one of the as the Obama administration predicted, a long and bloody and indecisive war.
Yeah, man, you really got to be careful with Democrats. Like, there are times where they'll do something. It sounds like they're doing it for the right reason, but it ends up just being like a very hollow gesture. It doesn't really do much. Like I think there was even a point where Obama had delayed or frozen some of the arms transfers to the Saudis near the end of his administration. But these things do very little, and is after years of supporting him. So yeah, you gotta watch for these things. I'm glad that Biden's administration is citing the war in Yemen. I'm glad they're at least like making that a reason. Like I don't think Trump would really have ever cited that as humanitarian concerns in Yemen. But yeah, I mean, like we just gotta watch and see if this will actually have a significant effect. Like I said, the arms deals to Taiwan and Kuwait, those are probably still going forward. He hasn't put any freeze or review on those. And the Taiwan stuff's a big deal. Like that, the whole reason we sell weapons to Taiwan is to antagonize the Chinese, and that's a massive like theme in the the Biden administration that you really want to pay attention to, the U.S.-China relationship. So.
Yeah, they've already been sailing the warships through the South China Sea, picking right up where Trump left off. So I don't think there's any reason to think that they're planning to like delay or really look at those weapon sales. Hell, he may even increase them. I mean, well, I don't know how Taiwan exactly feels about the Senkaku Islands, but those things are right off the coast of China and Taiwan, kind of right there. And Biden's saying that he'll defend the Chinese claim or the Japanese claim to those islands. So,
right,
yeah, he's going real far on his provocative military actions towards China. And unfortunately, I think you're going to have some of the same dynamics that the Trump administration had with Russia, where the Republicans are just stupid and insane on the China issue and are going to be, oh, Biden's owned by China. Anytime he does something that isn't threatened to nuke China off the face of the earth, it's going to be portrayed as Biden's giving everything away to China. And it doesn't help that the dude's mushy brained and probably has, and his son certainly has some corrupt business dealings with China. But I mean, you can't destroy the relationship, and you can't put all the political pressure for Trump, or excuse me, Biden in this case, to constantly be provocative towards China. But it seems like that's the start we're off to. So, Will, anything I'm missing, or should we wrap it here?
I think we hit all the bases, man.
All right. Well, Will, I'm so happy to have you back on the show. We'll do another one again soon. And, support the show, share the show. YouTube, Conflicts of Interest. We're at like 200 subscribers now, so that's great. Let's keep up the momentum, keep adding people in there. Again, support the show, Subscribestar, Patreon, wherever. If you're signed up, let me know what your Discord handle is, and I'll let you into the little chat that I keep open there. And libertarianinstitute.org. Will Porter's at RT, and you're the Will Porter on Twitter.
That's right.
All right. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Kyle. Take care, y'all.